Welcome to Potluck Politics. I'm Peter Roper, and we're lucky to have a great guest today, Christine Conley. You probably will recognize her. She's a member of Groton's representative town meeting, but she's now running to be representative for the 40th district of the Connecticut State Legislature. Thanks a lot for coming, Christine. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
Maybe we'll get to a few people who could vote for you. So in a word or two, why would you run for the thankless job of legislator, especially in these times, which are not the best of times, let's say?
So, in my opinion, this is the time to run. You know, this is the time where leaders step up and say the state has problems and we need to work together. We need to deal with these problems because complaining about them is not going to solve anything. So I have ideas to deal with our budget, ideas to deal with our laws, and now's the time to really change how Connecticut is structured, to change Connecticut for the better.
So you must like a challenge.
I do.
Okay, good, because it will be challenging, I'm sure. Tell us what the 40th district is so people know who are your voters, which part of town is your district.
So I describe the 40th as it starts down in the city of Groton, basically at the end of Electric Boat. It goes up through the city, north through the city, and then it veers out along Route 12, past the base, and then up into Gales Ferry. It turns around, comes back into Groton through military housing, and then it goes up 184 all the way up into Old Mystic.
Wow, so which voting places are your people going to be voting at? Do you know that?
It is the school administration building, Mary Morrison School, and the city municipal building in Groton.
Okay.
And then the southern end of Gales Ferry. There's two polling places at the same location in Gales Ferry, but the folks in Gales Ferry know where to grab their items and vote.
Yeah. Seems like a tricky district then.
It is an interestingly shaped district.
And do you like the idea of representing two towns as opposed to just one?
I like the idea that both towns have two representatives so that when there is something that comes up for the town, you have two voices. I'm sure people will have their best of friends might not be the same people, so you can gather more voices and more votes for the things that your town needs.
Yeah. So tell the voters who might be watching that may not know you, what in your background has brought you to this point and why you might be qualified for this.
So since I was a young girl, I always wanted to be an attorney. I went to Bay Path College, got a degree in legal studies and history, followed that up with getting my JD at Western New England College, and then came down to New London area for a job, like most people did. And I settled in Groton, met my husband, and decided to join a different firm with law office of Lori Conforti up in Norwich. And we represent injured workers, folks who are injured in all walks of life on the job, who need wages, who need medical treatment, and who need to get back to work or get into a voc rehab program if they are too injured. By doing that, you really see how all the services in Connecticut affect people. You see people at their best and worst of times. And I've seen very first-handedly what happens in these budget times when mental health is limited, when court time is limited, when resources and services that people need have been limited. So these things need to change.
So that work sounds like a challenge too.
I am a problem solver. So everyone who comes
good.
into my office has a problem that needs to be fixed, and that's what I do.
Good. That's what we need. What have you learned from your time on the RTM, representative town meeting, that you think will help, and what roles have you had there that will help as a legislator in the state?
So this is my third term on the RTM. I've served as moderator last term, and this term I am the Democratic floor leader. The RTM is truly representative of the town of Groton. You have folks from all different areas, and when something comes up, be it a school project or be it a piece of land being reused or a bridge, you have folks who live right in that area who know their neighbors, and their neighbors know how to find them, either at their home or at the grocery store, to tell them how they feel about it. So you truly have the voice of Groton represented in majority rules. This year, when Groton was faced with a substantial budget shortfall, I did propose an alternative budget, and I was very pleased that how well the RTM worked together for these difficult conversations, and how well we worked across the aisle, that it didn't really matter if you were a D or an R at the RTM. People were looking to do what was best for the town, how to deal with our budget shortfall in the least effective way. So in the end, we ended up with a good budget. Some things were reduced, but we were able to fully fund economic development so that we can grow the town. So a responsible budget came through this year.
So it's sort of a microcosm of what you're going to be doing at the state, because budget's going to be a big part of it.
Budget is going to be a huge part of most of the discussions over the next term. We have a substantial shortfall in the state, and we dealt with millions of dollars in shortfall in Groton this year. So I tell people, if I can do it in millions, I can do it in billions. It's the same concept, just different dollar values.
What committees were you on in the RTM? Or what committees have you been on?
Currently, I am the chairperson of community development, and I am on finance. Last year as a moderator, I was not on any committee.
Right.
You were able to attend all committees. The previous year, I was on finance. The previous term, I was on finance, and I believe rules and procedures.
So you've had a little bit of experience there, too.
A little bit of experience with the Roberts Rules of Orders, which is always good for the legislature.
Yeah, I found the rules I was on the RTM, and I found the rules interesting, and some people don't care, but it's really important to know the rules. So this is a big one. What do you hope to accomplish in the legislature? I mean, besides working on the budget, and unless that's your main goal, what do you think you might work on and accomplish? And I guess, what are you passionate about that takes you to the legislature?
I am passionate about laws that are written correctly. So as an attorney, I can never fully take that hat off. And when I see laws that come through, and some laws did come through this session that are just not written up to what I think is the appropriate standard, I see things and I can tell and read, knowing how the judicial works, and saying this is going to be a problem. This law is not going to be effective until either a judge rewrites it or the legislature rewrites it. And I see that wasted time is wasted money. So I'm
Some of that is intentional.
Some of that is intentional, but others of it, as you talk to the people who drafted it, it's unintentional.
Yeah.
So I want to be at that table to get our laws written better. We can do better. We have extremely bright people there, and we can hopefully get things to go a little smoother without some of these delays. But the budget is going to be a big discussion over the next 2 years. I have ideas, same thing I did at the RTM to deal with the budget. It's to look at each account, each department, look at our debts, look at our projects, and really have a fine eye on prioritizing services.
It would be a handful, I'm sure. And I guess you should talk a little bit more about the fiscal problems, and if you have specific solutions and what they might be.
Yeah, my goal is to be at that table when we're talking about the departments. In the legislature, a lot of those discussions are not on TV or not on camera. There's a lot of backdoor discussions. And every budget is a compromise budget. There's no way around it. To get the votes, there are compromises that are made. But I really do want to be looking department by department, looking at the debts. The debts is a big area where I believe we can make changes and free up a lot of money. State of Connecticut does have old debts, high interest rates. They're not what we can refinance. We can save some funds and transfer those over into the areas that have really been cut. And since there need to be more cuts, to try to preserve our vital services. It's things that need to happen too. Is Ledyard's school project is off the priority list. Ledyard needs that addition to the middle school, so that needs to get through for the town of Ledyard. Our school budget, or our town budgets, both Ledyard and Groton, had substantial hits. Groton lost $1.1 million across the board in multiple accounts. Ledyard lost about $600,000, and that's a lot. It's a lot for each town. For Groton, it really is, over 15 teachers or 13 police officers, and that's why when we trimmed each department to try to preserve as many jobs as we can, there is no room in the Groton budget for that to happen again. So I need to get that money back for both towns. Ledyard is the same. They're very tight. They're talking about not having enough supplies for children at school and having to do fundraisers. So these town budgets, and I'm sure other towns are just the same, are so tight that we can't have these $1 million hits next year.
Yeah, and I guess you should talk a little about the property tax. I'm concerned about the property tax in general, and as a way to fund towns. And what do you think you can do with that?
When the state does these overcuts, what happens is they're just passing the ball down to the towns, because no town wants to lay off that many teachers or that many police officers. So the town is then filling in the holes, and that's what we dealt with Groton, was filling in the holes with raising property taxes. So the state needs to get the budget in order. The state needs to find each dollar it can, really needs to look at projects and look at debts so that they're not just passing the buck down to the town. People need, to have the lowest taxes they can so that they can stay here. so that young people are willing to buy a place, and that the seniors can retire here and stay in their homes, and are not taxed out of their homes.
Yeah, that's where the pressure really comes, is seniors on limited incomes and young people who are on minimal incomes.
Young people who are struggling with student loans and jobs that they thought was going to pay them more, because we all expect more, or expect that raise to come quicker than it does. And then the longer you're at a piece of property, as you're putting more things into it, redoing kitchens, adding on for a family. When you're a senior, you often have a little extra space, but you want to stay in that home. You want to be able to afford it. So we do need to be mindful as to passing on debts.
You have any idea of efficiencies? I'm a believer in government. Some people don't even believe in government, but I'm a believer in government. But I really think we need to work constantly on efficiencies and doing what government does best for the least.
Yeah, so there's clearly management efficiencies that can be found in our state government. I know anyone who's dealt with numerous organizations knows that there are efficiencies in management. We do have a lot of managers that there can be efficiencies found. There are a lot of departments who do like things, and those like things can be combined. So that is a savings of efficiencies. It is, of course, it's easier. The less time that you require to set up anything or plan anything, it's time that you can use for something else. But they did combine 2 departments this year, the last budget, and while there was a lot of discussion, it did work out for both. So there is always anxiety with these changes, but if they're done correctly, if they're done with time to adapt to changes, it works out.
This is your chance to talk a little bit about your opponent, John Scott. What do you think you can do better than what he's done? Because he is an incumbent. It's tough to run against incumbents, so you have to have some reason why you should replace him. So tell us a little about that.
John Scott's had 1 term. And in my opinion, he has done a lot to enrich himself while he's been in Hartford. He worked to propose legislation to expand his business contracts with UConn. He worked, he sided with the insurance companies over access to health care for patrons, for people who live in Groton and Ledyard. He also proposed a new tax for our hotels, which would be detrimental to our business travelers and our conventions. It would be detrimental to our hotels. Luckily, none of those passed, but he did propose all those for various interests. At the same time, again, Groton and Ledyard both lost a substantial amount of money in their budgets. Groton lost $30 million to fix our old schools. You know, it's a huge loss for the town of Groton. And Ledyard schools fell off priority. So instead of being focused on the needs of the town, I feel that he was more focused on the needs of his business and the insurance business. So I plan on really focusing on what's good for Connecticut in this budget, what's good for Groton, and what's good for Ledyard.
Okay, sounds reasonable. Another issue that's important, you hear a lot of people talking about, is job creation. We're behind other states and haven't gotten back to a booming economy. Do you have any thoughts about job creation, specifically for Ledyard and Groton, and
so
the state can affect?
Yes, it is wonderful that electric boat is growing. Electric boat has kept Groton and Ledyard into its status for decades. And as we have grown before, we are growing again under the lead of Electric Boat. The Navy base is also bringing more folks in, so that is more spouses and significant others and more job opportunities for people who are not military to support the military. So these, with more people over, we have 1,000 people coming to work in Groton with EB next year, 4,500 over the next couple of years. That means more people looking for housing, more people with money to spend at the restaurants, more people, at all the businesses. Groton and Ledyard are unique. We have a substantial amount of young people. So our last survey that the town did showed how many young people there are. So I have a very good idea of what young people want, being one of them. What we want in activity and recreation and housing, and I've met with several developers talking about what young people want in housing, because people are looking at the growth of EB as an opportunity to purchase land, vacant land, old schools, and build what the young people, what the young engineers want, what the young families want. So once we get, it's always good to have the building and the building trades at work. And then again, that's more money in people's pockets, and that money trickles right down to our area. So as EB has grown before, it's coming around again, and we're blessed to have it.
Any thoughts on the idea of diversification? Because we have had boom and bust cycle with EB in the past, and then we had casinos that kind of picked up some of the slack. Maybe not the same wage gains, but there were jobs. And now the casinos have sort of slumped off and EB's come back. But but that cycle may not always be there. Sometime we may have them both slumping. So, have any ideas about diversification and alternatives that this region could be working on?
Yeah, so with the recreation aspect of things that young people like, we have amazing opportunities with the sand lot that's hopefully coming up soon. We can really be a hub for recreation in Groton. Mm-hmm. And that's what people choose to do with their spare time these days is more of the experience and less of the shopping. You know, you want to do something. So we can grow not only our tourism industry, but our recreation industry. We have excellent things going on with Mystic, with having wonderful ideas going on with the the old tennis facility, and we can build on that. But also the businesses, as families have the good wages that EB provides, the businesses, the small businesses, have those funds that they need to grow. Ledyard and Groton. Ledyard has a great opportunity with a building for small businesses to grow, as does Groton has started with the science businesses. So to give people those breaks in rent that it's needed with their small business, so that they can use their money the best they can to grow and not worry about some of the bills that do stifle small businesses.
Since you're an RTM member and working with the local government, you must have some idea how the state affects local governments. You've already talked about that a little bit, but you want to expand on that at all and talk about the impacts on education, for instance, and our budgets in general?
So a substantial part of our budget comes from state funding and federal funding for education. But also, more importantly, is the time frame. So when each town is doing their budget, the state has not yet done its budget, and we know the federal government is slower than the state. You're working with a lot of guesses, a lot of question marks. So what I want to do is try to get the money a little more clarified to the towns. So this year we were dealing with Groton. Are we going to have a $200,000 cut or a $4 million cut? And those two different cuts are very different when it comes to budgeting. Ledyard dealt with the same thing. They were thinking, are we going to have a couple $100,000 or $1 million? So to get those numbers clarified for the towns, since they do their budgets first and set their mill rates first, would be very helpful. The second thing is dealing with our unfunded mandates. The state does release a book. It's not very exciting, but it's all the unfunded mandates together, and really putting an eye on that, because when we're looking to free up money, and each town there's a lot of areas that you cannot touch due to the laws, and I think the town should really be able to have more of those discussions as to what is best for their unique town. Of course, some things are necessary, and then as new laws come through, and I strongly feel if the state cannot pay for it, the state cannot mandate it. To really let the towns decide.
Yeah, none of the mandates are good, but the funding isn't there, so it makes it pretty hard.
It does, and when you're talking about, do you have the money for that school resource officer or for this unfunded mandate, which is a nice idea, but for your town not as necessary as that school resource officer, I think the town should be able to have those conversations.
Let's shift a little bit and think more globally. Who are you supporting for president and why?
So I'm supporting Hillary Clinton.
I knew that,
yes.
but I still want to hear you say it.
I love saying it. So Hillary's for 40 years fought for women and children and families. She even went to law school for an extra year to help the more poor people in New Haven when she was at Yale. I didn't go to law school for an extra year. Many people did not. So she has started, her career has always been about women and children and families. She reformed the education system when she was the wife of the governor, and she was first lady at a time when we had surpluses and growth instead of these deficits that we have now. So she knows how to get it back. She's also, of course, more than qualified in her own career, being a senator and being Secretary of State.
Good. I noticed, I watched the debate you had with John Scott, and I noticed he refused to endorse a candidate and claimed that in the London Days Forum that the president doesn't have any effect on daily operation of the state. What do you say to that? I mean, I think it's outrageous, but what do you say to that?
I completely disagree with John Scott in that comment. This federal government funds an awful lot of our state issues. They fund our special needs education. They fund our roads. They fund an awful lot of police. They fund an awful lot of building projects. So the federal government is hugely impacting the day-to-day. Now, I don't expect any president to be calling me on my cell phone, although I certainly would pick up. But when you look at the 40th district and you look at our employers, you have Electric Boat, who is dependent on federal contracts. We also host our Navy base. That is dependent on the federal government. And with BRAC coming up again, it is so important that we have Joe Courtney in the right committees, which he's on, to get us off BRAC as soon as possible. It is so important that we have our other Democratic senators and congressmen to be with Joe if needed, and to know that those 8 individuals will get the ear of a Democratic president if needed. To keep the space open, because without the federal support of the base and electric boat, southeastern Connecticut would not be the same. So this area of Connecticut is very reliant on the federal government.
And I feel that you as a Democrat, working with Democrats at the federal Senate level and Joe Courtney at the rep level and the governor, I think that actually is a benefit to our communities. I mean, I know the Republicans are running against the governor and against Democrats, but to me, it seems like Democrats working together are much more beneficial to our community than having a Republican represent us.
Yes, you get more. Democrats are in leadership in the state and for our state in the federal government. So you do get more. Do I agree with everything that everyone says? Of course not. That's why we have our own voices. In the end, we each have our own jobs. So I disagree with a lot of what the governor does, but he works in a different branch of government than I plan on working in. Joe Courtney and I get along very well, and I plan on being there to support him. If he needs me in DC to deal with BRAC, I will happily be there, as will, I'm sure, many of my Democratic and many of our Republican friends too, because everyone does need the base to stay open. So we will all be there. It is much easier, since we have federal Democratic leadership, to have a president who they can call, who they know, who they can rely on, especially for BRAC.
I just feel like the alternative to Hillary Clinton would be a disaster.
Yes.
On many levels.
Many levels.
And we would feel the effects.
He did mention that Trump said he doesn't support public education. Well, that's a substantial amount of our education budget. Comes right from the federal government that he can have control over. It's not just the broader concepts. This does affect us day to day.
Right. I assume you're talking to voters. I hope you are.
Yes.
What kind of things are they telling you, and what issues do you find that are important?
So the economy is on everyone's mind. The local economy, state economy, and federal economy. There is definitely more of a hopeful outlook. I've been knocking doors since May. So I've been heavily knocking all summer. And with the growth of EB, with the growth of Sikorsky, and with the growth of Pratt, there is more of a hopeful outlook as to what's going on with jobs in our state. Always good to hear. People understand that folks with good jobs will have the money to spend on other things in life, and the builders will be building, like I said, and the supporting businesses will be growing again too. Manufacturing is the way of Connecticut. We have been known as the insurance state, but we are turning into the manufacturing state. We are a huge defense state as well. But there's also, everyone has their own idea. I was talking to a veteran who had a hard time getting his prescriptions, and I was able to contact Joe Courtney's people, and they were able to solve that problem for that gentleman within just a couple hours. So to see how just running for as a candidate, you can help people with their issues. Education is on people's minds. The state of our schools is on people's minds. And then people have very specific ideas, of course, as to teachers, and then as to healthcare. With the L&M Yale merger, that's been on people's minds. And the general things that affect everyone, from health to healthcare, down to how your aging parents are doing, and how is that affecting your work-life balance. So I think every door is a different conversation.
So are you enjoying that one-on-one?
I do.
Seems like you're animated, so you must be liking it.
Yes.
And people generally are probably glad to see you, aren't they?
They are. A lot of people tell me if you're not in the big neighborhoods that they don't see candidates as much. So they're pleased to see. In the big neighborhoods, you do see everyone every couple of years. But in the smaller neighborhoods, people are pleased to see your face, pleased to have a chat.
Yeah. What have we missed here that you want to talk about? And this is your big chance to get some more information out that may help people become your voters. So.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So as I said before, I am passionate about the law. It's one of the most exciting areas of the legislature for me, is to have those discussions that other folks might not enjoy as much as I do. Is it moving this comma? Does it hurt or help the law? I enjoy that stuff. So that's why I belong up in Hartford, to deal with those things. But I'm a problem solver. Like I said, every single person who comes into my office is having a problem. They're big, problems are small problems, but they're all someone's problem, and they all do need to be resolved. I resolve them by the law, by going to court. So this is another opportunity to resolve problems, to resolve our budget problems, to resolve the structural problems within our laws that are hindering people and making our system slow down. So I look at every problem not as something to complain about, as something to work on. And there are like-minded folks. There's new leadership in the House, and that will get the tone changed and get a lot more things done this term.
Great. Sounds like a prescription for improvements.
Yes.
That's good. One thing we didn't really mention, you mentioned briefly talking about what young people might want to do in this area and really the quality of life. Can you speak a little bit about the environmental issues that you might be dealing with at the state legislature? Because I know, global warming is affecting us already, and the state is going to need to be involved in that. So.
Yes, so Joe Delacruz has more of the coastline than I do.
Yeah.
But as the legislators work, you work with your neighbors. So I'll be working with Joe Delacruz on one side, and with most likely Chris Soto on the other side, in the New London side, to deal with global warming and the oceans rising is directly going to affect our coastlines. We are right on the edge, literally.
Yeah, it's already affecting us.
It is already affecting us. So that is going to be something that we have to discuss. We have to make sure that our growth is done correctly. We may need to be looking at building codes. Things may need to be risen up. And our bridges, the Grand Long Point Bridge is a little low. And when there is a storm, they have problems. So even though it's not directly in my district, I hear it, I know it.
Yeah.
And we need to get some state or federal investment to start working on that, because we don't want that bridge to come out in a storm situation. Yeah. So, young people are more aware. We've known about global warming, I think, my whole life. We believe it. We know that's the wave of the future, and we have to deal with these issues.
Yeah, it really affects everything. I mean, I'm an environmentalist, so I come from that angle, but I know it's hard, but we don't have a choice.
No.
It's here, and we got to do something.
Yes,
so.
We have to do something, or else we have to move. And
I
like where we are.
One more thing to fit in the budget.
Yes, one more thing, another problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, we're lucky. I think you're lucky to be potentially representing this area, because it is a nice place. Groton is great. Ledyard has a lot of nice aspects to it, and they make sense as sister communities. But I wish you luck. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us. And maybe we'll see you again as an official representative. I appreciate your participation and your willingness to run, because I know it's not easy and it's not always pleasant, but you seem like you're enjoying it. That's good, and hope it works out. Thank you to our viewers. I urge you all to get involved, get educated, get out and vote, and be well.